1800s, up through the trappers and explorers and so forth into the walker parties, excursion into Bradshaws in 1864. Our speaker is Mick Woodcock. Mick is the chief curator of the Sharlot Hall Museum. He's been employed in the curatorial department for 42 years, I think it is.
Coming up on 42.
Coming up on 42. I'm getting ahead of things. So,
thank you.
Anyhow, he is a graduate of the University of Arizona in history. He's spent practically his whole life here in Prescott. He is the person who founded the Living History program at the museum. He was very instrumental in starting the Fort Whipple Museum out at on the Veterans Administration grounds. He several years ago won a prestigious award from the Association of Living History and a whole bunch of other things that I can never remember. But he and a prolific writer, a great historian, and we're happy to have him, and we're happy to have him here today.
Thank you, Fred. Now all I have to do is live up to the Fred's expectations here. So, exploring Arizona, you probably, how many of you have looked at the exhibit? About half, okay. Well, I won't be offended if you decided to take a nap here. So, Arizona. The name Arizona probably comes from a Basque word meaning the good oak tree. Bernardo de Urrea, a Spaniard of Basque heritage, established the village of Arizona in northern Sonora around 1735. A couple of years later, they discovered silver there, and it's mentioned in Ignaz Pfefferkorn's report Sonora, a description of the province. Pfefferkorn was a Jesuit priest in Arizona between 1756 and 1767. So Arizona's unique landscape is a result of complex geologic history. This is a topo map of Arizona made in 1923, and it was created, Arizona's created from a couple of different things, but it has environments that ranged from warm, shallow seas to windy desert dunes, and from violent volcanic eruptions to just lava flows that were particularly violent. Two different landscapes shape Arizona. And you've probably all been to the Grand Canyon, but the Basin and Range province in the southwest and the Colorado Plateau province in the north are separated by a transition zone. So these result in major contrasts in population, agriculture, industry, water supply, and tourist attractions. Most people live in Metro Phoenix or Metro Tucson. This is not to slight Yuma, but people live in the valleys of the Basin and Range province. The broad valleys offer greater groundwater availability, so they can support these. For that reason, more industry and agriculture exist in this province than any of the others. I will admit that we're getting a pretty good size population here, and of course Flagstaff is a big center. But we live in the transition zone. And no, this is not us, this is Jerome. But Prescott's located in the transition zone, shares the characteristics of both provinces. So we've got a little sedimentary rock from the Colorado Plateau. We also have mountains, which are characteristic of the Basin and Range. Now, I like to tell people that one of the reasons Prescott exists, and the only reason it exists, is mineral resources. Arizona has mineral resources. So this is a geologic map of Arizona, 1924. And to quote the Arizona Miner from March 9th, 1864, so the town is just not even established. People are coming here and they say, there is not a richer mineral region in the world. The mountains are literally interlaced with silver veins, while the recent discoveries of gold denote an almost unparalleled profusion of that precious ore. So the Colorado Plateau hosts national parks and tourist attractions such as the Grand Canyon. The geology is the sedimentary rock layer cut by canyons that allow water to drain away. So water's precious here. If you've been to Monument Valley, red sandstone in some places are eroded into these wonderful mesas and buttes, marking photographic vistas that John Ford used in some of his westerns back in the day. All of the energy resources produced in Arizona, such as coal, uranium, and oil, are in this area. Moving to the south, this is Lavender Pit. So it's a copper mine. Its name was named, I always thought, oh, hey, it's the lavender color. No, it was named for a man named Harrison Lavender, who originally started, or was a part of the company, and he figured out how to mine the ores on a place called Sacramento Hill. This hole started out as a hill. Feature that. So anyway, the Basin and Range, as well as the transition zone, have mines that yield important metals. Many of the open pit copper mines occur in the Basin and Range, although we do have one in Baghdad, so that's kind of on the edge. The diverse mineral deposits are due to mountain building episodes and intrusions of igneous rock. The ebb and flow of oceans and the historic volcanic activity across Arizona give the richness of the mineral and fossil record. And so this is a watercolor done by Lillian Wilhelm Smith, who was a resident here. She did this in the 1950s. Mining goes way back in Arizona. Arizona's prehistoric inhabitants used its geology to their advantage. Utilizing simple tools, they quarried basalt and obsidian for tools and malachite, azurite, and argillite for ornamentation. Much of this was traded away for other things. Salt deposits in the Verde Valley, and this is the Verde Valley Salt Mine, were worked off and on. Stone tools recovered from mining in the 1920s there indicated that the Camp Verde salt mines had been mined more than 600 years ago by prehistoric people. It was reported that when the site of the Silver Belt mine, and you can see on the building there it says Silver Belt, the Silver Belt mine, and this was in Yavapai County over by Dewey, discovered in 1870, that when they found it, there were stone tools and other evidence that the deposit had been worked by native inhabitants. Don't know how far back that goes, but. So, bring on the Spanish. Spanish exploration in Arizona was sporadic, I guess is a good word. Francisco Vasquez de Coronado reported on his trip to Arizona and New Mexico, he said, neither gold nor silver nor any trace of either was found. So much for the search for El Dorado. During the 1500s, Spanish explorers rode northwest from Mexico in quest of converts to Christianity and mineral wealth that would rival the treasures of the Aztecs and Incas. No such luck. In 1583, an expedition under Antonio de Espejo found copper and silver in the mountains near modern-day Jerome. By 1599, Marcos de Farfan de Godot's party had returned to the area. They did not find mineral riches, but discovered the Verde Valley. And it had splendid pastures, fine plains, and excellent land for farming. That's what they said. But the Spanish never stayed to farm, ranch, or mine. So figure that. So there's the Verde Valley. So Coronado, and this is not Coronado, by the way, just a little bit on him. In 1540, Captain General Francisco Vasquez de Coronado commanded an expedition from Mexico seeking the reported riches of the 7 cities of Cibola. They crossed the Gila River and went through parts of Arizona, including the Colorado Plateau, without discovering any kind of wealth. In 1583, Antonio de Espejo led 9 Spaniards and nearly 150 Zuni into Arizona. They went as far as Jerome, where they found precious minerals. The party returned to New Mexico with silver ore, yet years passed before anything became of that. In 1598, Captain Marcos Farfan sought a salt spring in Arizona, and when he found that, he moved on. He only had 8 men with him. These guys are just traveling around in the wilderness pretty much by themselves. He located silver near Prescott, yet the Spanish again made no serious effort to establish mining operations. So and this, getting to Farfan, he returned to New Mexico, and this prompted Juan de Oñate, and these are an artist's depiction of the Oñate expedition. They trekked into Arizona. In 1604, his party reached the fork of the Bill Williams River, went down to the Colorado, and then on to the Gulf of California before returning eastward. And that's it for the Spanish. They're done. You know, they find mineral resources, but they never capitalize on it. So we fast forward to the 1820s, and we have just a little bit earlier, we have the Louisiana Purchase. This opens up the kind of the Central West, and one of the big things is beaver trapping, beaver skins for top hats and all kinds of hats. Beaver fur was really popular, and Arizona had beavers. And the thing is, beavers were trapped here, but what would become Arizona was Mexican territory. It was not part of the Louisiana Purchase. And at the beginning of the fur trade era, Americans could come in, they could live in the Mexican territory, but Mexican officials would not give them a license to trap. They said, "No licencia por americanos." That didn't stop the guys, but anyway, there were a number of trapping expeditions. Ewing Young, James Ohio Patty, and others went to the Gila, Salt, and Colorado rivers in the 1820s and 1830s. These were all illegal expeditions. So the beaver of the Southwest was, and this is probably more information than you want, but Castor canadensis mexicanus, a lighter color and thinner fur version of its northern cousins. So fewer in number on Arizona streams. It only took a few expeditions to trap them out to low levels, so they were not worth trapping. Because of trapping and finally man's diversion of water starting in the 1880s in Arizona for agricultural use, the native beaver population just disappeared. They went away. Beavers were reintroduced using the northern beaver, Castor canadensis canadensis. Just a little bit bigger, darker heavier fur. You probably wouldn't know the difference unless you had them side by side. And there are still the Mexicanos version down in Mexico. Why they didn't go down there and bring those up, who knows? Well, in 1846, a war erupted between the United States and Mexico, and in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo brought an end to this conflict. The document signed and the subsequent 1854 Gadsden Purchase prompted the United States government to launch a series of expeditions led by Army officers to explore, map, and record information about the geography, geology, and natural history of the newly acquired Southwest. And so that's what we're going to take a look at, exploring the newly acquired territory. So the Army had explored the rivers and travel routes of what would become Arizona, and this was a carefully thought out, phased program. Each one of these expeditions had an artist with it. This is before photography was real portable. So here we have Mojave Indians crossing the Colorado. And with a series of 4 expeditions that were conducted by the Army Corps of Topographical Engineers in the 1850s, they mapped the remote parts of the new lands acquired from Mexico. So this is a sketch of the Whipple expedition. The very first one was the Sitt-Greaves, Zuni, and Colorado River Survey, followed by the Whipple Railroad Route Survey, then the Ives Colorado River Survey, and finally the Beale Wagon Road Survey. And they all helped open central Arizona to settlement during the territorial period. Interesting thing is, this is Francois Javier Aubry, and he's a civilian of Canadian birth, traveler of the Great Plains, and by the time he became acquainted with what's now northern Arizona, he was about 20, I think he was about 24, 25 years old. But in 1852, Aubry took a herd of sheep down the Colorado River route to California, and then the next year he takes another herd across what we would know as the I-40 route. So he returns to New Mexico. He makes a report on this, very detailed notes, and it's published in the local newspaper in Santa Fe, but Mr. Aubry got himself in a knife fight with a Richard Waitman, which he came out second best in. So Aubry's out of the picture, killed by Waitman, but his report is used by Army officers to plan the I-40 travel. So the Sitt-Greaves expedition, and there are no surviving photos of Sitt-Greaves, so this is his physician, Dr. Samuel Woodhouse. What can I say? So, to quote Woodhouse, incredible report, and I've read most of it, but a quote, he says, "Since we left Bill Williams Fork, there have been clouds seen every day, and anxiously did we watch for rain, but this seemed a thing impossible, to rain in this miserable country where everything appears to be an enemy and is armed with a thorn or a poisonous sting." Did he call that right or what? So Lorenzo Sitt-Greaves himself graduated from West Point, and he's in 1832, and he, after all that, he resigns and becomes a civil engineer, and then and then in 1840 he decides, well, I want back in the Army, so he gets back in, and he commands the first exploring expedition along the 35th parallel. So the mission of the Zuni and Colorado River Survey was to see if the Zuni River, Little Colorado River, and Colorado River were navigable. They started at the Zuni villages in September of 1851, and they had Antoine Leroux as their guide. And you need to remember his name because he comes up again and again. Now, the plan, as soon as they got on the road and got into Arizona, which was still New Mexico at that time, had to be modified. So they headed west to intersect the Colorado River below the Grand Canyon. They ran into the Grand Canyon, so they could not possibly do anything other than go to the Colorado below this. So it became a route for the Santa Fe Railroad in years to come. Now, Anton LaRue, they're in, these are probably Wallapais, but they have some brush with the natives, and Antoine LaRue received 2 arrow wounds before reaching the Colorado River. And Dr. Woodhouse was wounded by a Mojave arrow at the Colorado River. And Woodhouse, he didn't fare well on this expedition. Before he even left the Zuni villages, he had thought he had killed this rattlesnake, and he took his shotgun ramrod and picked the thing up, and it bit him on the thumb. And he nearly died. But the great thing about being a physician is he recorded the whole thing, so you can see how miserable he was. So anyway, the trip down the Colorado River proved harrowing, with attacks from both the Mojave and the Yumas, and not a good thing. This is some Wallapais sketched by the artist. Whipple Railroad Survey Route. So this is indeed Amiel Weeks Whipple, or at least a drawing of him from a photograph. He was born in Massachusetts in 1817, and he entered West Point, and after a year, this was after he'd gone to Amherst College for a year, and he graduated 5th in a class of 41. This is in 1841. So following assignment to the Corps of Topographical Engineers, he acted as a surveyor for public works projects, a military reconnaissance in Louisiana, and the boundary surveys of Canada and Mexico. So this is his sketch of his men at the petrified forest, probably lithodendron wash, but this is fairly well known. So in 1853 and 1854, Whipple, guided by who else? Antoine LaRue, commanded the Pacific Railroad Survey through northern Arizona along the 35th parallel. With him were Heinrich Baldwin Mulhausen as artist and naturalist, and Lieutenant Joseph Ives as his assistant. We'll catch Ives a little later. So the collections and reports from the survey provided the most complete description of the landscape, plants, and wildlife that had been gathered in northern Arizona's Chino, in northern Arizona, and this is a sketch of Chino Valley. They never actually got up in here. They just kind of skirted it. The Beale Wagon Road Survey. So this is Edward Fitzgerald Beale in his kind of later years. He's famous for using camels in his survey. And so Beale wrote that the camels are now keeping up easily with the train and came into camp with the wagons. They were a little slow on the uptake, but Beale himself graduated from the Philadelphia Naval Asylum School. I'll tell you about that, in 1842, but he was following a family tradition of being a Navy officer. Basically, the asylum school was a grouping of buildings that had the Navy old sailor's home, a hospital, and the precursor to the Naval Academy at Annapolis. So it was the Navy school, but they called it the asylum. It was a collection of buildings. Beale himself was born in 1822 in the District of Columbia. Both his father and grandfather were Navy officers. In 1845, he was sent to California and subsequently served on land there during the war with Mexico. So Beale gets tired of the Navy in 1851, resigns, but he doesn't give up on the West. He becomes a catalyst for Congress appropriating $30,000 in 1857 for the purchase of camels for use in military transportation. Camels in America. So, he was appointed, he's a civilian. This is a military expedition, but he was appointed to survey a wagon road across the 35th parallel, using camels to transport his equipment. The camels worked well, but were lost in the shuffle of the nation preparing for war. And the interesting thing is the Secretary of War at the time was Jefferson Davis, who was later the President of the Confederacy. Odd stuff. So camels. There's an entire report, which we have in archives, on buying these camels. It's called the Report of the Secretary of War communicating in compliance with a resolution of the Senate of February 2nd, 1857, information respecting the purchase of camels for the purpose of military transportation. Oh my. So anyway, the Army imported camels, and these illustrations are from that report. So Congress appropriated money to buy these camels and have them shipped to Texas as an experiment in desert transportation. So they wound up buying 75 camels. They cost, as I said, $30,000. And the first acquisition was 33 animals. For use. Now, one hump or two. Here's Americans over in the Middle East going, camels? What are these? We don't know anything about camels. The detail was to differentiate between the one hump variety, the Arabians, and the two hump variety, Bactrians. Arabians were, and to make it more interesting, Arabians were further broken down into camels, just plain old camels, beasts of burden, and then there were dromedaries used for riding. I mean, there's no difference in the kind of animals, just the training and the use. So the report detailed the purchase and the information for camel care. And so here's a beast of burden. What does it say? Oh, a tuilu. Tuilus are a cross between a camel, a one hump, and a two hump. I think maybe they had one of these. Well, not only did they import camels, but they imported camel drivers. So they brought native drivers to a good idea because camels are real specific. This guy winds up staying here. He was called High Jolly. And originally his name was Haji Ali, but you know how Americans are. We're gonna anglicize his name. He becomes High Jolly. Born in Syria in 1828, he decided to stay in America. So he goes with Beale to California, later makes his way to Arizona, working as a scout for the Army, and eventually winds up in Tucson. So this is a camel. This is drum barracks, kind of outside of San Diego, or in Metro San Diego, I don't know. And probably a very concerned horse. Apparently they did not get along well. So in Tucson in 1880, he becomes a naturalized citizen, and his name is Philip Tedrow. He marries Gertrude Serna, and this is their wedding photograph. And he stayed in Arizona for his whole life and actually moved to the western deserts, prospected, traveled around, and finally he had purchased camels in California that had been sold by the Army because the Army had no use for them. And they were sold at auction in 1864, used them in Arizona, later releasing them into the desert. And he spent, where else, his final years in Quartzsite, dying there in 1902. And so if you've been to Quartzsite, how many have been to Quartzsite? Seen the monument, been there, done that. So that's the and it's still there, High Jolly Monument, Quartzsite's claim to fame. The Ives Colorado River Survey. Yes, this is Joseph Christmas Ives. Born in 1829 in New York City, and he winds up a Confederate colonel. You figure that one out. You could probably Google that. So he graduates from West Point in 1852. He's assigned to the Corps of Topographical Engineers, and his first duty, as I said, was to accompany Lieutenant Whipple on his railroad survey. So this assured his next assignment, which was a hydrologic and geologic survey of the Colorado River, the largest river in the country that had not been surveyed by the Army. And so the Army wants to know, can we navigate the Colorado? And to that end, Ives is equipped with the Explorer. It's kind of like an early man IKEA boat kit. Literally, they just hauled this stuff over to the Colorado River and put it together. So the Explorer, Ives spends part of 1857 and 1858 traveling. He goes 530 miles up the river to determine the head of navigation. That was kind of part one. He then returns to the Mojave Valley, where he prepares for a land expedition that would survey along the edge of the Grand Canyon and then take them to Fort Defiance before they headed back. And as his artist naturalist Heinrich Baldwin Mulhausen accompanied him. So Mulhausen made a couple of these trips. So this brings us Ives' report, the report upon the Colorado River, the West, real short title, was printed in 1861. You know, Ives is headed off to be a Confederate colonel. But the Central Mountains of Arizona are the only place that haven't really been explored. So where we're sitting in 1861 is Yavapai country. No Anglo has ever been up here. So the man that we looked at there was Joseph Rediford Walker. And the first group to arrive and find gold in the Central Mountains of Arizona were the Joseph R. Walker Exploratory Party. They had this big, long name. There were a lot of these guys. Originally, they started out in California. So the discovery was made in March 1863 on the headwaters of the Hassayampa River in the Bradshaw Mountains, south of present-day Prescott. And this is, if you look back up the Hassayampa, way up there, that's where they're going. However, this is not the only gold found in the area. Rich Hill. At about the same time, a party organized by A.H. Peoples and guided by Paulino Weaver discovered gold at Rich Hill west of the Hassayampa. And the reports are that you could just walk around and pick gold up off the ground. I've never done that, but that's what they said they could do. So, news gets out of claims being filed, and this, of course, brings other gold seekers to the area. This is a sketch called Arizona Gold Rush, published in Century Magazine in 1891. So sure enough, Lynx Creek gold kind of is the standard for our area here, because there were rich gold deposits on Lynx Creek, one of the most profitable sources of gold in the entire county. And I'm not sure when they figured this out, but they thought that as much as $1 million, that's back then dollars, of gold were recovered from Lynx Creek. And this is Bigelow's Flat, as you can see. If you kind of use your imagination, the dam is currently kind of in here, and the lake goes back like that. So it's all underwater these days. So placer gold remains when gold-bearing rocks weather away, and gold often collects in the gravel of stream beds. Placer miners used both wet and dry methods to recover gold from the sand. So here's a couple of guys on Lynx Creek in the 1890s living in their shack and trying to make a living panning gold. Prospectors washed stream bottom sands in a pan to separate the heavier gold nuggets and dust from the lighter sediments. But they also ran gold-bearing sands through shakers through screens and into tilted riffle boxes, which is kind of a bigger method of recovering gold. Now, gold is not the only thing that's here. Peck mined silver. Silver mining was very important. One of the richest silver lodes in Arizona was discovered by this group of guys. Edmund Peck, Thomas Alexander, Curtis Cobean, William Cole, and L.B. Jewell. And Peck had scouted for the Army, and he's in a store one day, and somebody brings in some ore, and silver ore, and Peck sees it, and he says, I know where some of that is. So he gets these guys to go in with him on this expedition, I guess you'd call it. And the newspaper talks about it, and they say, you know, these guys are having a hard time raising money to finance their expedition. And so I'm reading between the lines here, but in 1881, there's a lawsuit, and the paper says, verdict brought by Mrs. Catherine Alexander, that'd be Thomas's wife, against Peck Mining Company to recover the value of the stock in that company, won for $80,000. In many respects, this is the most important case ever tried in the county in the courts of the territory. My guess is that Catherine Alexander had, like all ladies, a stash. And so Thomas, her husband, says, you've got to bankroll this. And she says, okay, stock in the company. And so they give her stock in the company, but when they come to sell the company, they don't honor her stock. And so she takes them to court, and she wins. So this will give you some idea of how rich these deposits were. So Peck and his guys, they dug 10 tons of ore, which they sold to the Arizona Assay Office in Prescott for $13,000, sorry. They used the money to develop the mine. It yielded about $1.5 million in silver between 1875 and 1885. That's a lot of money. These guys were smart, though. They had all these mining claims, and they knew not all of them were good, so they set aside some of them and sold lots to make a town. And so here's Alexandria. named for Thomas Alexander. Now, ore had to be crushed to make the precious metal suitable for smelting. And the Aztlan mill in Groom Creek was not the only mill around, but it was used to process some of the Peck Mine ore. And they did a lot of, they were doing all kinds of processing. And so it processed ore from various mines in the area, and the owners of the Peck got tired of having to wait in line, so they just bought the mill, and so their ore could be worked first. And this photo is the dedication of the new shaft at the Peck Mine, September 3rd, 1903. So it's still producing silver into the 20th century. And with that, there is a specimen of the ore from the Peck Mining District, slightly enlarged for your enjoyment. Actually, the piece in our collection is about the size of my fist. So, with that, I'll take questions. Yes?
Where is the Peck Mine?
Peck Mine is out in the vicinity of Dewey. There's a lot of mineral mining back in there. The Peck Mining District, well, you know what? That's not true. Peck Mining District is back up towards Cleator, back in that area. Alexandria, the town site, I mean, there's nothing there, but it's back up on that road. Yes, ma'am?
Are these just private claims, or is it a company working with the mine?
The company actually worked the mine.
But currently?
Oh, currently, no, it's long filled in. It's not active.
What do you know about Vulture Mine? It was closed for quite some time, silver mine, and it's opened up again. It's owned by a company in England.
What can I tell you about it? Okay, historically, I can't tell you anything about it now, but historically, the Vulture was probably the biggest producer in the county. It's a big mine. Early on, it is producing ore like crazy. It's almost constantly in the newspapers about how much money they're getting out of it, and how many mule trains and wagon trains that they're producing. So it was big. And the thing about this part of the country, the minerals are still there. They're just hard to get at, and they're not profitable. So that's why a lot of these have not been. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Mick, would you care to speculate why the Spanish, after financing expeditions and finding mineral resources, didn't do anything about it?
Jerome is a long way from Mexico City. Plus, they have the Zuni Uprising, which kind of just shuts everything down west of the Rio Grande. So, yeah, it's just too far away, not enough. The thing is about the conquest of Mexico and the conquest of Peru, the Aztecs and the Incas had already done the mining and the smelting. All the conquistadors were doing was coming in and taking, they weren't putting any effort into getting the metal out of the ground and working it. They're just ripping people off. So, yeah, so I think too much work, not enough profit, too far away from Mexico City. Yes?
How far did they navigate up to Colorado?
Ives went 530 miles to what he referred to as the head of navigation.
The answer to that is around Hardyville, which is kind of across from Laughlin. That was about as far as they could get up the river with any supply boats.
Good answer. Anyone else? Questions you were afraid to ask? All right, Fred, thank you very much.